The large spaceship U.S. Horizon slowly landed on the surface of planet Diminutia. Dust and small rocks flew everywhere as the engines powered down. This planet had never been visited by humans before. It looked beautiful from space, covered in blue oceans and green forests. John Miller stepped out of the ship and took a deep breath. The air smelled fresh, like pine trees after rain. John was very tall, about 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders and strong arms. Despite his large size, he moved carefully and spoke softly. As the ship's marine biologist, his job was to study the animals and plants on this new world. "Control, this is Miller. I'm heading into the eastern forest to collect samples," John said into his radio. "Copy that, Miller. Remember to check in every 2 hours," replied the voice from the ship. John adjusted his backpack and walked toward the dense forest. The trees here grew close together, with strange purple leaves that seemed to glow slightly. Small flying creatures that looked like a mix between butterflies and hummingbirds darted between the branches. After walking for about an hour, John found a small clearing. "This looks perfect," he said to himself. He set down his equipment and began to assemble his portable lab. First came the folding table, then the analysis equipment, sample containers, and his notebook computer. "I should get enough samples before dark," he muttered as he organized his tools. John always talked to himself when he worked alone. It helped him think better. He bent down to examine a strange flower with petals that changed colors when he moved his hand near them. "Amazing," he whispered, gently taking the small cutting and placing it in a sample jar. As John worked, he didn't notice the tiny eyes watching him from beneath a broad leaf only a few feet away. The observer was a female alien, no taller than John's palm. Her skin was blue with a slight shimmer, and her large eyes, 3 times the size of a human's proportionally, blinked rapidly as she watched the giant creature move around the clearing. Ziri had never seen anything so enormous that walked on 2 legs and made such strange sounds. The elders of her people had told stories about giant monsters from the stars, but she had always thought they were just scary tales to keep young diminutions from wandering too far from home. John reached for another tool in his kit, accidentally knocking over a small container. The sudden noise startled Ziri, making her gasp. The tiny sound was just loud enough for John to hear. He turned quickly, looking around. "Hello? Is someone there?" Ziri froze, pressing herself against the leaf stem. Her heart beat wildly in her chest. The giant was looking right toward her hiding spot. John moved closer, his enormous face now just feet away from where Ziri hid. She could see the strange texture of his skin, the tiny hairs on his face, and the huge eyes that seemed to search everywhere. "That's strange," John said. "I could have sworn I heard something." He knelt down, his large hands moving leaves aside gently. When he lifted the leaf Ziri was hiding under, she couldn't help but let out a tiny squeak of fear. John's eyes widened in surprise. There, no bigger than his index finger, stood what appeared to be a tiny blue person. She had arms, legs, a head with large eyes, and was clearly wearing some kind of clothing made from plant materials. "My God," John whispered, his voice still booming to Ziri's small ears. You're intelligent." Ziri took one look at the enormous face hovering above her, the massive mouth that could swallow her whole, and the huge hands that could crush her without effort. Pure terror raced through her body. She turned and ran as fast as her tiny legs could carry her, disappearing into the underbrush. John remained kneeling, too shocked to follow. "Wait," he called out, but the tiny being was already gone. "I won't hurt you." He sat back on the ground, his mind racing. He had just discovered something amazing. This planet had intelligent life, and they were tiny. He needed to report this, but he also wanted to make contact again, to show the small creature he meant no harm. John decided to stay in the clearing. Maybe, just maybe, curiosity would bring the tiny alien back again. Ziri ran until her small lungs burned. She ducked under roots and weaved between tall grass stems that seemed like trees compared to her 4-inch height. When she finally stopped running, she was deep in the familiar part of the forest where she felt safe. "I saw it. I really saw one of the sky giants," she said out loud, still trying to catch her breath. Her blue skin had turned slightly purple from exertion. Ziri belonged to the diminution science team. Her people lived hidden in this forest for thousands of years. They built tiny cities inside hollow trees and underground chambers. The diminutions were very smart and had advanced technology, but they never grew big or explored beyond their small part of the planet. When the huge ship landed earlier that day, the Council of Elders had sent scouts to observe the visitors. Ziri had volunteered right away. She loved learning new things, even dangerous things. Now she pulled out her recording device, a small crystal that could store images and sound. "The giant is much bigger than our legends described," she spoke into the crystal. "It stands taller than our oldest trees, but it moves slowly and seems careful not to step on plants or small animals." Ziri decided she needed to watch the giant more before reporting back to the council. She took a drink from her water pouch and started making her way back toward the clearing, this time more carefully. When she reached the edge of the clearing again, she climbed up a small flower stem that gave her a good view while keeping her hidden. The giant was still there, sitting on the ground. It seemed to be writing something. "Fascinating," Ziri whispered as she watched John work. He picked up tiny creatures with gentle fingers, looked at them closely, and then set them free again. This was not what the diminution story said about sky giants. The old tales warned that giants would eat anything they caught. For 3 hours, Ziri observed John. She noticed how he talked to himself in a low, rumbling voice. She couldn't understand his words, but his tone sounded kind, not scary. She saw how he carefully stepped around a line of tiny insects, avoiding crushing them. "Maybe the stories are wrong," Ziri said quietly to herself. She leaned forward on her flower stem to get a better look at what the giant was doing now. The council had told everyone to stay away from the giants, but Ziri had always followed her curiosity more than rules. Her parents often said this would get her in trouble someday. Maybe they were right, but Ziri couldn't help herself. This was the most exciting discovery in diminution history. As the day went on, dark clouds started to gather above the forest. John looked up at the sky with concern. He began packing some of his equipment. "The giant is leaving," Ziri noted into her crystal. But instead of going back to his ship, John set up a small shelter in the clearing. He crawled inside just as the first raindrops began to fall. Ziri had to find shelter too. The raindrops were as big as her head and could knock her down easily. She scurried down the flower stem and ran toward a large leaf that would keep her dry. Suddenly, a gust of wind shook the plants around her. Ziri lost her balance and tumbled down a small slope. She rolled and bounced until she landed in an open area with no cover. The rain was falling harder now. Each drop felt like a rock hitting her small body. Looking around frantically, Ziri realized with horror that she had rolled right to the edge of the clearing. The giant's shelter was only a few steps away. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a loud crack of thunder. Ziri had to make a choice: stay in the open and risk being hurt by the storm, or seek shelter closer to the giant. With another crash of thunder, she made her decision. Keeping close to the ground, she ran toward the edge of the giant's shelter, hoping to find a dry spot underneath it where she could hide until the storm passed. What she didn't know was that John had seen her tiny form dash across the rain-soaked ground toward his tent. The storm grew worse. Rain pounded on John's small tent. Wind howled through the trees, bending them like they were made of rubber. John sat inside, looking at his samples and writing notes by the light of a small lamp. A sudden movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of his tent, was the tiny blue creature he had seen earlier. She was soaking wet and shivering, pressed against the ground as rain pelted her small body. John moved very slowly. He didn't want to scare her away again. He reached for an empty sample container. a clear box with air holes in the top. Then he carefully extended his hand outside the tent, placing the open container on the ground near the tiny alien. "It's okay," he said in the softest voice he could manage. "This will keep you dry." Ziri looked up at the giant's huge face. Her whole body trembled with fear and cold. The rain was hurting her, but the giant might hurt her worse. Then she saw the clear box he had placed nearby. It looked dry inside. Another crash of thunder made her decision. Ziri ran into the container, grateful to be out of the rain. Before she could turn around, the giant's enormous hand moved, and the lid closed over her. "No," Ziri cried, but her voice was too small for John to hear over the storm. She pushed against the clear walls, but they wouldn't move. She was trapped. John brought the container inside his tent. He placed it carefully on his small table and looked closely at his captured specimen. He could see now that she was definitely intelligent. She wore clothes made of woven plant fibers and had something like a small bag strapped to her back. "Don't be afraid," John said, though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. "I just want to help you get dry." Ziri backed into a corner of the container. The giant's face filled her entire view. His eyes were enormous, each one bigger than her whole body. She was sure he would eat her now. But instead, John placed a small piece of cloth inside the container through a sliding door. It was soft and dry. "You can use this to dry off," he said, pointing to the cloth, and then making a wiping motion on his own arm. Ziri stared at the cloth. Was this a trick? After a moment, she reached out and touched it. It felt nice. She pulled it around her shoulders like a blanket. John smiled. He reached for his backpack and took out a small food bar. He broke off a tiny crumb and put it in the container too. "You must be hungry," he said. The smell of the food reached Ziri's nose. It was strange but not unpleasant. Her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since morning. Cautiously, she approached the crumb. It was bigger than her hand. She broke off a small piece and sniffed it before putting it in her mouth. It tasted sweet and good. Ziri ate more, watching the giant carefully the whole time. John's radio crackled to life, making Ziri jump. "Miller, report in. The storm is getting worse. Are you secure?" came a voice. John picked up the radio. "I'm fine, Control. I set up shelter in the clearing, but you won't believe what I found." He looked at Ziri with excitement. "There's intelligent life here. Tiny humanoids, about 4 inches tall." "Say again, Miller. Did you say tiny humanoids?" "Affirmative. I have one here with me now. She's intelligent, wears clothes, shows fear and curiosity. This is an amazing discovery." The radio was silent for a moment. Then, "Do not do anything until we discuss this, Miller. This changes everything about our mission." "Understood, Control. I'll keep her safe until the storm passes." John put down the radio and looked at Ziri again. She was watching him intently, her large eyes studying his every move. "I need to understand you," John said. He pointed to himself. "John." He repeated it several times. Ziri realized he was telling her his name. She pointed to the giant and said, "John." Then she pointed to herself and said, "Ziri." John's face lit up with a huge smile. "Ziri," he repeated. For the first time, Ziri didn't feel scared of the smile. Maybe being trapped wasn't so bad after all. At least she was dry, fed, and the giant, John, hadn't tried to eat her. Not yet, anyway. The storm continued through the night. Ziri slept in one corner of the container, using the cloth John had given her as a bed. John stayed awake for a long time, watching her with wonder and making notes in his journal. When morning came, the rain stopped. Sunlight filtered through the trees and into the tent. Ziri woke up and saw John sleeping nearby, his giant body rising and falling with each breath. She took this chance to study him more closely. His skin was a color Ziri had never seen before, not blue like her people, but a pinkish brown. His face had small hairs on it, and the hair on his head was much darker and thicker. Ziri found him strange but less scary now. John opened his eyes and saw Ziri watching him. He smiled and sat up slowly. "Good morning, Ziri," he said. Ziri pointed to herself again. "Ziri." Then she pointed outside. "Home." John understood. She wanted to go home. He felt sad at the thought of letting her go, but he knew it wasn't right to keep her trapped. "I'll take you home soon," he said, using hand gestures to show his meaning. "But first, can we talk more?" John reached for his tablet computer. He turned it on and showed Ziri pictures of different animals and plants, saying each word out loud. Then he showed her pictures of his ship and crew. Ziri was amazed. She touched the screen with her tiny hand, making John smile. She was learning quickly. John tried a new approach. He drew a simple picture of himself on the tablet, then a tiny figure like Ziri. He drew more tiny figures, then pointed questioningly at Ziri. "How many of your people are there?" he was trying to ask. Ziri understood. She held up her hands, opening and closing them many times. "Many," she said, using a word she had learned from John's lessons. John nodded. Then he drew a picture of a house. "Where do you live?" he asked, pointing to the drawing and then to Ziri. Ziri hesitated. The elders had always said to keep their homes secret from outsiders. But John had been kind to her. She pointed toward the eastern part of the forest, where several large ancient trees grew close together. "Home," she said. "Ziri people home." John grew excited. There was a whole civilization of tiny people living in the forest. He wanted to see it, to learn about them, but he knew he should be careful. His size alone might cause damage or fear. Suddenly, his radio crackled. "Miller, report to the ship immediately," said the voice of Captain Lisa Rogers. She sounded serious. "On my way, Captain," John replied. He looked at Ziri with concern. He couldn't leave her in the container all day, but he also couldn't let her go without learning more. After thinking for a moment, John had an idea. He opened the container and placed his hand inside, palm up. "Ziri," he said gently, "come with me. I promise to keep you safe." Ziri looked at the giant hand. It was as big as the floor of her family's home. Going with John to his ship would be scary, but it would also be a chance to learn about the sky giants that no diminution had ever had. She thought about how the council would have told her to run away, to go home, and never speak to the giant again. But Ziri had seen kindness in John's eyes. He had given her food and shelter during the storm. He had not tried to hurt her. Taking a deep breath, Ziri stepped onto John's palm. Her tiny feet tickled his skin. John smiled and carefully lifted his hand. He placed Ziri on his shoulder, right next to his shirt collar, which she could hold onto for balance. "Hold tight," he said, pointing to his collar. Ziri grabbed the fabric of John's collar. It felt rough but sturdy. John packed up his tent and equipment quickly. Then he started walking back toward the U.S. horizon, taking careful steps to avoid bouncing Ziri too much. From her perch on his shoulder, Ziri could see farther than she ever had before. The forest stretched out below her like a tiny model. She could even see the edge of her people's territory in the distance. "Amazing," she whispered, her fear giving way to excitement. What other wonders would she see on John's giant ship? The human ship was bigger than anything Ziri could have imagined. It rose above the trees like a mountain made of metal. As John walked toward it, Ziri held tightly to his collar, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. "That's my home, for now," John said, pointing at the U.S. horizon. Ziri stared at the enormous structure. The metal surface gleamed in the sunlight. Strange sounds came from it, humming, beeping, and occasional loud noises that made her jump. "Big," Ziri said, using one of the words John had taught her. "Very big." John smiled. "Yes, it is big." As they got closer to the ship, a door opened in its side. John walked inside, and suddenly they were in a world completely different from the forest. The air felt cooler and smelled strange. The walls and floor were hard and smooth. Bright lights shone from the ceiling. John walked down a long hallway. Other humans passed by, their footsteps loud on the hard floor. They stared at John, or more specifically, at the tiny blue figure sitting on his shoulder. "Miller, what is that?" asked a man in a uniform. "Her name is Ziri," John said. "She's a native of this planet. Captain Rogers wanted to see me right away." "I'll say she does," the man replied, looking at Ziri with wide eyes. "Word's already spreading about your discovery." John continued walking until he reached a door marked Command Center. Before going in, he spoke softly to Ziri. "These are my leaders," he explained, pointing to the door. "They might seem scary, but they won't hurt you. I promise." Ziri nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood completely. Everything was strange and new. She just knew that staying with John felt safer than being alone in this giant metal place. The door opened, and John entered a room filled with screens and control panels. Several humans sat at desks, but one woman stood in the center of the room. She had short gray hair and a stern expression. "Lieutenant Miller," she said, "I see the reports were true." Captain Lisa Rogers walked closer, her eyes fixed on Ziri. She bent down slightly to look at the tiny alien. "This changes everything about our mission," the captain said. "We were supposed to study the planet's ecosystem, not make first contact with an intelligent species." John nodded. "I know, Captain, but Ziri found me, not the other way around. And there's something else you should know. She's told me there are many more like her living in the eastern forest." The captain's eyebrows went up. "A whole civilization of beings this small?" "Yes, Mom." The captain turned to a screen on the wall. "Show me the latest solar readings." A man sitting nearby pressed some buttons, and the screen showed a picture of the sun. There was a bright spot growing on its surface. "That's what I was going to tell you about, Miller," the captain said, her voice serious. "Our sensors have detected a massive solar flare forming. When it hits this planet, it will bring radiation levels that could be deadly to unprotected life forms." John looked worried. "How long do we have?" "The flare will reach us in approximately 72 hours. We've been ordered to complete essential research and leave before it hits." John looked at Ziri, who was watching them talk with confused eyes. "What about Ziri and her people? We can't just leave them here to die." The captain frowned. "Our mission doesn't include evacuating native populations. Besides, where would we put thousands of tiny aliens?" "We have to do something," John insisted. "They're intelligent beings. We can't leave them to face a disaster they don't even know is coming." Ziri tugged on John's collar. "John, bad thing come." John was surprised. Ziri had understood more than he thought. He turned to face her. "Yes, Ziri. A bad thing is coming from the sky. It will hurt your people if they stay here." Ziri's large eyes grew even wider. "Help Ziri people, please." The captain watched this exchange with a thoughtful expression. Finally, she sighed. "Miller, I want a full report on this species. Numbers, location, technology level. Then we'll discuss options, but I make no promises." She looked at Ziri again. "Explain the situation to her. We need to know more about her people before we can help them." John nodded, relief washing over his face. At least the captain was willing to consider helping. Now he just needed to find a way to communicate the danger to Ziri, and through her, to her people. John took Ziri to his small room on the ship. He set up a comfortable space for her on his desk using a soft cloth and a small box lid for walls. Ziri sat inside, watching as John worked on his computer. "I need to show you something important," John said. He opened a program that showed a simple picture of the solar system. He pointed to the sun and then to the planet they were on. "This is your world," he said, pointing to the planet. Then he showed an animation of a bright flash coming from the sun and hitting the planet. "This bad thing will come soon. It will make people sick." Zuri watched closely. She was learning human words quickly and understood the basic idea. Something dangerous was coming from the sky. "Hurt Zuri people?" she asked, pointing to the planet. John nodded sadly. "Yes, but we can help if your people will trust us." Zuri thought for a moment. The council would never trust the giants. They would hide deeper in their underground homes. But the sadness in John's eyes told her this danger was real. "Zuri, go home. Talk to leaders," she said finally. John looked worried. "I should go with you." Zuri shook her head. "No. Big humans scare all people. Zuri, go alone. Come back." John wasn't sure if this was a good idea, but he respected her decision. "How will you find your way back to the ship?" Zuri pointed to the window. She could see a tall mountain in the distance. "Zuri, no way. See big hill. Walk to metal home." John smiled at her simple but effective navigation plan. "Okay, but how will I know you're safe? And how long will you be gone?" Zuri held up her small recording crystal. "This make light when Zuri push." She demonstrated by pressing a spot on the crystal, making it glow blue. "Zuri, push when safe home. Push again when come back." John was impressed by her clever solution. "Smart," he said with a smile. He helped Zuri pack a small bag with food crumbs and a tiny container of water. Then he carried her outside the ship to the edge of the forest. "Be careful," he said as he set her down on a leaf. "Come back soon. We don't have much time." Zuri nodded. "Zuri, come back. Promise." Then she turned and disappeared into the underbrush. John watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then reluctantly went back to the ship. Captain Rogers was waiting for him. "Where is the alien?" she asked. "Her name is Zuri," John said, "and she went to speak with her leaders about the danger. She promised to return." The captain looked doubtful. "You let her go. What if she doesn't come back?" "She will," John said confidently. "She understands the danger." Meanwhile, Zuri ran through the forest as fast as her small legs could carry her. She knew the way home well. After 2 hours of running and climbing, she reached the outer guard posts of her city. The guards were shocked to see her. "Scientist Zuri, everyone thought you were dead or captured by the giants," one guard said. "No time to explain," Zuri panted. "Must see council. Emergency." The guards led her through the hollow tree trunk that served as the main entrance to her city. Inside, hundreds of diminutions went about their daily lives. Homes and shops were carved into the inner walls of the tree. Bridges made of sturdy vines connected different levels. Word spread quickly that Zuri had returned. By the time she reached the council chambers, a crowd had gathered. The council of elders sat in a semicircle on mushroom-capped seats. The head elder, an old male named Pax with dark blue skin, stood up when Zuri entered. "Scientist Zuri, we feared you were lost," he said formally. "The scouts saw you taken by a giant." Zuri stepped forward and bowed. "Respected elders, I was not taken. I went with the giant willingly. His name is John, and he is not our enemy. He and his people have discovered a great danger coming to our world." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The elders looked at each other with concern. "What danger could be worse than giants who could step on our city without noticing?" asked one elder. Zuri held up her recording crystal. "Please, see for yourselves. Our world is in danger, and the giants want to help us." The elders fell silent as Zuri activated the crystal, showing them everything she had learned from John. The council chamber was silent after Zuri finished showing them the recording. Elder Pax stroked his long white beard with a troubled expression. "This could be a trick," said Elder Mira, "a female with light blue skin. The giants could want us to come out so they can capture us all." Zuri shook her head. "I have lived among them. They could have hurt me but did not. John saved me from the storm. He gave me food and taught me their words." "But can we trust them with our entire population?" asked Pax. "There are nearly 10,000 diminutions in our city and more in the other settlements." Zuri stepped forward. "Respected elders, I believe we have no choice. The danger from the sky is real. Our shelters underground will not protect us from it. This is invisible harm that passes through earth and wood. The council talked among themselves while Ziri waited. She pressed the crystal as she had promised John, making it glow to signal she was safe. After what seemed like a very long time, Elder Pax spoke. "We will send a group of 5 scientists and guards with you to meet this John and verify his claims. If what you say is true, we will consider evacuation plans." Ziri bowed. "Thank you, Elder Pax. We must hurry. The danger will arrive in less than 3 days." Back at the ship, John was watching the forest edge anxiously. Captain Rogers stood beside him. "It's been 8 hours, Miller," said the captain. "We need to start preparations to leave." John pointed to a small blue light visible among the leaves at the forest edge. "Look, that's her signal. She's alive." "That doesn't mean she's coming back," the captain said. "She will," John insisted. "She promised." 2 more hours passed. John refused to leave his post by the window. Suddenly, he saw movement at the edge of the forest. "There!" he exclaimed. 6 tiny figures emerged from under a leaf. One was Ziri. She waved her arms when she saw the ship, then pointed to her companions. John rushed outside. He knelt down near the tiny group, careful not to move too quickly and scare them. "You came back," he said to Ziri, smiling. "And you brought friends." Ziri nodded. "These scientists and guards. They check danger real, then help plan save people." The other diminutions stared up at John with a mixture of fear and curiosity. One stepped forward, a male with darker blue skin and what looked like tiny tools attached to his belt. "Ikel," he said in halting human speech that Ziri must have taught him. "Head science. Show us danger proof." John carefully transported the group to the ship's science lab. Captain Rogers met them there, along with several other crew members. The humans watched in amazement as the tiny aliens examined the equipment and data screens. Kel and his team studied the solar radiation predictions for several hours. They asked questions through Ziri, who was getting better at translating between the 2 languages. Finally, Kel approached John. "Danger real," he said gravely. "Our people die if stay." Captain Rogers stepped forward. "We can take some of your people on our ship, but not thousands. We don't have room or supplies for that many." Ziri translated this to Kel, and the scientists had a quick discussion in their own language. Then Kel asked to see the ship's communication equipment. John led them to the communication room. Kel examined the technology with great interest. After a long discussion with his team, he turned to John. "We have plan," he said. "Diminutions have ships too. Small ships, sleep ships. Long ago, our ancestors come here from stars." This surprised everyone. John hadn't realized the diminutions were capable of space travel. "Ships old, sleeping long time," Kel continued. "If your people help wake ships, fix power, we save many diminutions." Captain Rogers looked skeptical. "You have spaceships." "Where?" Kel pointed east, deep under Big Mountain. "Hidden many years." Ziri had not known about this either. Her face showed surprise as Kel explained that only the highest council members knew of the ancient ships. "Our ancestors say use only if world dying," he said. "World now dying. Need help fix ships fast." John looked at Captain Rogers. "This changes everything. If we can help them repair their own evacuation vessels, we might be able to save them all." The captain finished, her expression softening. "How much time would we need?" Kel conferred with his team, then said, "With human help, maybe 2 days." The captain nodded decisively. "Then we better get started right away." The next 2 days were the busiest in both human and diminution history. The U.S. Horizon landed near the mountain where the ancient ships were hidden. Captain Rogers sent a message to Earth explaining the situation and requesting permission to help the diminutions. The answer came quickly: save them. John worked closely with Ziri and Kel. The humans provided tools and power sources, while the diminutions showed them how to access the underground hangar. Inside were 12 oval-shaped vessels, each about the size of a human car. They had been sleeping there for thousands of years. Our ancestors feared the giants of space, Zuri explained as they worked. They hid our ships and our history. Only Council knew truth. John carefully repaired a tiny control panel, using special tools the engineers had made for working with such small components. Why didn't your people ever leave this planet? Elders say we safe here, hidden, Zuri said. Until now. By the end of the first day, 3 ships were working again. By the end of the second day, all 12 were ready. Each ship could hold 1,000 diminutions in special sleep chambers for the long journey. Word had spread throughout the diminution territories. Families packed their most important belongings and made their way to the mountain. The council organized the evacuation, deciding who would go on each ship. On the morning of the third day, the solar flare was only hours away. The sky had already started to look strange, with unusual colors in the clouds. Radiation levels were beginning to rise. John stood at the entrance to the underground hangar, watching as the last groups of diminutions arrived. Zuri stood on his shoulder, helping direct her people. All diminutions will fit in ships? John asked. Zuri nodded. Yes, some leave things behind, but all people fit. She looked sad. Many years on this world. Hard to leave. John understood. Where will your people go? Ships have old star maps, Zuri explained. Show planet like this one. No giants there. 3 months' travel. Captain Rogers approached them. Miller, we need to leave in 1 hour. The radiation will reach dangerous levels soon. John nodded. Just a little longer. I want to make sure they all get on safely. Finally, the last diminutions entered the hangar. The only ones left outside were Zuri, Kel, and Elder Pax, who had come to say goodbye to the humans. Thank you, giant friends, Elder Pax said in careful human speech. Diminutions live because of you. Captain Rogers bowed slightly. We wish you a safe journey to your new home. Kel went inside to help with final preparations, leaving Zuri and Elder Pax with the humans. John knelt down to be closer to Elder Pax. I hope our peoples meet again someday, John said. Elder Pax nodded. Perhaps, when fear is gone. Then he too went inside, leaving only Zuri. John looked at his tiny friend. You should go, Zuri. Your ship is waiting. Zuri didn't move. She looked up at John with her large eyes. Zuri, stay with John. John was surprised. Stay. But your people. Zuri, scientist, she interrupted. Want learn about humans, teach humans about diminutions. Be first. What word? Bridge between peoples. Captain Rogers raised her eyebrows. Are you sure that's what you want? You might never see your people again. Zuri nodded firmly. Sure. Already talked to council. They agree. Zuri be voice of diminutions. John felt a wave of happiness. He had grown fond of the tiny alien who had once feared he would eat her. I would be honored to have you stay, Zuri. 1 hour later, the 12 diminution ships rose from the underground hangar. They looked like silver eggs flying into the sky. John, Captain Rogers, and the crew of the U.S. Horizon watched them go. Zuri stood on John's shoulder, a small tear rolling down her blue cheek as she waved goodbye to her people. The U.S. Horizon took off soon after, flying away from the planet just as the full force of the solar flare hit. From space, they could see the radiation sweep across the surface like a glowing wave. Zuri watched through a window as her home world became smaller and smaller. Sad, she said quietly. John stood beside her. Yes, but also a new beginning. Zuri looked up at her giant friend and smiled. New beginning. Zuri not afraid of human now. John smiled back. And I'm very glad to have a diminution friend. What had started with fear had turned into something neither of them could have imagined. A bridge between two very different worlds.